This is an RNZ podcast.
Midweek Mediawatch o'clock in this new dawn, this new age, here on nights. Colin Peacock is our man tonight. He is joining me now from our studio in Wellington. Hello, Colin.
Hi there. New dawn. I like that.
It's a new dawn. It's a new day.
Well, more Wednesday waffle.
Hey, Wednesday waffle continued. Yes, with Colin Peacock. Here we go. All right. Where should we begin? Well, we should probably begin in Los Angeles, where there have been a few casualties. But on Monday, this was just remarkable. The US correspondent of Australia's 9 News, Lauren Tomasi, made the news, Colin.
Yeah, she did. This was, I'm guessing a lot of people would have seen and heard this. She was shot in the leg with a rubber bullet during a piece to camera, a live report on Channel 9 in Australia during the, do we call them protests or riots? I'm not sure. But anyway, it was on, I think, Monday, seen all over the world. But in case you missed it, it sounded a bit like this.
The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA. Whoa! You just shut the
You okay?
I'm good.
Absolutely wild. The audio there is really evocative. The video itself is, well, even more so. She was okay, not seriously hurt to the best of our knowledge?
Yeah, not at all. In fact, just seconds after, you can hear people saying, gosh, are you okay? And she goes, yeah, I'm all good. She was just startled, shocked a bit by it. But she played it down. This is kind of interesting. She played it down as an occupational hazard, the sort of thing that can happen. She knew immediately it wasn't serious. And that is appropriate because worse things were happening in LA to other people. In fact, there was one reporter from something called the Southern California or South California news group who was hit twice in just a few hours apart, once by a pepper ball, which I wasn't familiar with. It left a big round bruise, and one of those same rubber bullets from the LAPD riot police. And there was a British reporter who had a really bloody injury from one of those same rubber, I think he called it a sponge bullet, and maybe the same sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, people were being hurt. And of course, people will be looking, if it's conflict zones and journalists being hurt and being targeted or genuinely caught up in it, Gaza, of course, so much going on there, so many serious deaths and injuries there, that this one, it would seem weird. Like one of your colleagues on 9 News, Carl Stefanovic, on their breakfast show, he really did a long spiel staring right down the camera saying, she is one of the best of us, Lauren. It is unconscionable what has happened. Really, really playing it up. I think to an extent that I suspect Lauren Tomasi herself would not have wanted to, because she did not do that in the field. But if I was her, I would have been hurt by her own network posting this on social media, calling it caught in the crossfire, because the wild part of the footage, as you called it there, is how you can see that reporter the police officer lining her up.
She did not get caught in the crossfire.
No.
Absolutely not.
He lined her up and released that bullet, and it was all, the angle was perfect. Plenty of people saw it, and you could see from the context of people milling around, there was no imminent threat to that guy, and she was clearly and obviously reporting. So, yeah, and Logan Church on TVNZ's 1 News, who's also there in LA, he used the same phrase, just, fairly casually, caught in the crossfire. There's no way, and it's just not the right description.
No, yeah. Well, I saw this attracted the attentions of the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Yeah, he turned up to a press club event in either Sydney or Melbourne, I'm not sure which, but Channel 9 was there, so of course they asked him about it, and this is how he replied.
It is not unreasonable to think that she could go about her coverage clearly, as people can see the footage, clearly identified as media. And so we have already raised these issues with the US administration. We don't find it acceptable that it occurred, and we think the role of the media is particularly important.
That's an interesting response. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I think it's a good response because he had some more things to say at the start about, I think he used stronger words than unacceptable. But, these days, as we know, and maybe we'll talk about this in a minute, another instance of it, politicians not always getting rewarded for sticking up for the media. In fact, possibly getting a boost from their base for sticking it to the media. So I think it was good. I think it was good that he said that. But then again, as we were just saying, this is one reporter not seriously hurt in this incident. And again, if you're going to stick up for reporters in one place, maybe in another, there's, Australian and other reporters in Gaza and, of course, local journalists there bearing the absolute brunt of what's happening there in terms of deaths and injuries and disruption to the way they work. So, I think you could make yourself a hostage to fortune for doing it, but good on for doing it because, it's something that did require a response. And that's a clear signal, isn't it, when you see, one of your own or whatever, if you're an Australian at home, just lined up by a police officer so casually it appeared like that. They'd appear not to be restrained in any way in firing off a bullet like that, even when they can see in line of sight a camera trained upon them and very likely capturing them and shot doing it.
It is just amazing what's happening in Los Angeles at the moment. Have you seen much coverage of this protest slash riot, depending, I suppose, on your point of view? I should probably figure out what the terminology is.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's an important point because it's about whether you overplay it or not, because I haven't seen so much last couple of days, but on Sunday, had a bit of time off, and I fired up the Haystack app, which is quite cool. Anyone with Freeview, if you've got one of the Freeview devices that has the Haystack app on it, which gives you free streaming of the US news channels, they're 24-hour ones when there's something on. So I watched a bit of ABC and CBS, a couple of other the local stations as well, just to see. Some of them in Florida and other places are not covering it at all. So we'll do our local news. But for these national networks, they certainly did do it. And ABC, for example, had 2 helicopters up. They had Air 7 and Air 9, and they cut between it beautifully. It was actually pretty compelling to watch. But it gave you a sense, once you got up high, of how this was actually in the evening time, I'm guessing. So if it was, I think it would have been early evening LA time, probably Sunday. Actually it was Monday I was looking at the stuff, our time. And you could see that really was, by the early evening anyhow, quite a limited collection of pretty small things. There were some dumpster fires, as they were calling them, and you could see dotted around a couple of those self-moving cars that had been set on fire. But it really wasn't a huge block-by-block city disruption. I gather earlier in the daytime there had been big crowds numbering in the thousands, and they had descended on federal buildings, police buildings, and so on. So there was a bit more tension there. But really, once you got above it, and so it all looked to be going on within a couple of city blocks, a few strange things. One shirtless guy drove a minivan into the protesters and then sped off, hooning around the railway lines, doing donuts and so on. They followed him with these Air 7 and Air 9, followed him in with the spotlights, and eventually the guy was arrested with absolutely no fuss. He got out of the car, and the police very casually walked up, handcuffed him, took him away. None of that, get down on the ground, guns drawn stuff. So it felt to me as if what the mayor of LA and some of the governor, Gavin Newsom, were saying, like, this is being beaten up by Trump for his own purposes. And
well, do you think by Trump or by the news networks in America, the 24-hour cable news networks? So I suppose it might be in their interests to make this into a mountain as well.
Well, that's sort of what I was getting to. I think those 24-hour networks kind of didn't, by actually showing you, but there was nothing much episodic going on when they got above the territory and you looked down and saw, really, this isn't a huge area. But when you see the 2-minute reports and you see that stuff and you see the clip of Lauren Tomasi thrown in, and, Logan Church, not to pick on him, but was talking about, streets of fear, what will happen next. And when it's all condensed like that, I don't know. But I mean, this has been going on 3 or 4 days now. And of course, today we've had the mayor of LA saying we do need a curfew in that central area. But Logan Church, to give him credit, tonight on One News a couple of hours ago, he did say, look, this is a small central area of LA that they're talking about keeping people out of. And he did give you that context. The LA County is enormous and, where these National Guard troops are. So giving you the clear sense and speaking to local people, he said, this is a clear overreaction. It's nothing we couldn't have handled, they felt. Jon Stewart, the I guess we call him a comedian, satirist, but on his show he was making this point that LA has had plenty of disruption before. They're fairly used to it. He even talked about fires break out from time to time in protests. He called it America's most flammable city, and then left a little pause. It's probably a bit soon after the fires to be making that gag from the East Coast. But I mean, he was making a point. He also said, look, this is a city that generations have grown up. He said embracing the people Trump and others are demonising, but making the point that the people you interact with on a daily basis are some of the people being targeted here. The people that bring your food, cut the lawns, work in the city, do civic jobs, work in banks, said all walks of life. And that this really is something that everyone in LA who, isn't an out-and-out MAGA person would probably have a different reaction to. So all of that context, I think, came across if you watched a bit of media and varied it up.
Back home, some huge moves in the news media last week in New Zealand at Stuff and NZME. We heard about some of these on Midweek Mediawatch last week and also Mediawatch last weekend. There was one aspect, though, you think was overlooked a bit, Colin.
Yeah, the risk of driving people absolutely nuts who are not totally obsessed with the inner workings of the business side of our media companies. I thought it was interesting, the advocacy ads, because Dr. Don Brash is a shareholder in NZME. He asked the outgoing chair and CEO at that meeting, would they be changing their position on advocacy ads, because you'll remember the Herald copped a lot of flack last year putting a Hobson's Pledge ad.
Yes.
That's the group he essentially leads. Hobson's Pledge, they put it on the front page, a wraparound ad. Then when they reversed that position later, they wanted to place another one. They said no, because there was a bit of a strong reaction against the Herald publishing that. Don Brash himself said, NZME can get stuffed. He said in a written column, very strong, angry column about the restriction on their what he believed was their right to publicise their campaigns on the Herald. The chief executive, Michael Boggs of NZME, he explained, look, it's different advocacy ads from Harvey Norman ones. And Don Brash got a really firm response from the outgoing chair, Barbara Chapman, when asked if the policy would change. She said, look, actually accepting advocacy ads isn't a matter for the board. They just ensure there's an appropriate policy in place. And then she kind of summed it up from fairly forcefully like this.
But we are not social media. We are a commercial business, and we're not required to accept any advertisements which don't meet our standards. Further, it's not our editorial team who make the decisions on whether to run an ad. That decision is made by our commercial team, which is backed up by an advertising review panel comprising a number of NZME executives. And if an ad doesn't reach our standards, we will not run it.
Well, that's definitive. Good policy in your view?
Whether good or bad, I mean, that's right, media companies make their choices about this. I haven't really got a position on it, but it's very clear. That's the thing. It's absolutely clear. And when, these companies get targeted a bit for being lily-livered and not allowing, free speech and a range of views for censorship effectively, the journalists get blamed for this and the editors and so on. She's making it clear, we've got a policy, the board doesn't interfere. We stick to that. It's about just making sure that's consistently applied. So it will be interesting actually to see, now that they have a different board that has said, they've got the commercial interests of the company at heart and want to improve its performance. Be interesting to see if they think it's something the board should get involved in.
But the main objection to the Hobson's Pledge ad, though, wasn't it more that it was like was it a front page or a wraparound ad? So it looked like a page of the paper. It kind of, and maybe to some people may have looked like the Herald was actually endorsing the cause. Similar criticisms are levelled at an earlier CTU one that targeted Christopher Luxon. Yeah,
and that was before the election campaign, where very posterised, very stark image, untrustworthy. That was very fierce, that one. So the chief executive, Michael Boggs of NZME, did actually talk about that in the shareholders' meeting.
On a number of ads, our readers haven't differentiated between it being an advertisement or it actually being some editorial. And that's our sole rationale for taking it off the front page, some ads. So when it has the New Zealand Herald masthead and it has an ad, if it's Harvey Norman, people normally know it's Harvey Norman selling fridges. Sometimes with advocacy ads, they think it's the Herald brand saying that. So that is our sole reason for changing that. We had a large number of cancellations at one point when we did run some ads, and then we made the decision not to run the ad. We had a large number of cancellations for not running the ad, so it wasn't a winning day for me.
Yeah, that's
It's a tough position to be in,
yeah.
but he's saying that, look, the masthead was on it. And so I think they're saying they did kind of make a mistake. But, as was pointed out, it actually went to executives who are on that panel that decide on the ads. And it's not something that's in the gift of editors or even the board itself.
And such is the nature of the butterfly effect, Colin, that, a butterfly flaps its wings, the Herald runs an ad from Hobson's Pledge, and then a few weeks, months down the line, James Grennan tries to roll the board.
Well, the things are connected, or seem to be. Look, we had the Free Speech Union, saying during that NZME board battle that it had approached James Grennan and other wealthy people, I think that was their own description on social media, encouraging them to invest to bring about change in this sort of thing. But, it was never mentioned in that meeting, by the way, that the ad industry regulator, the Advertising Standards Authority, eventually did rule that Hobson's Pledge ad that offended people. It was on the wraparound of the Herald and also, incidentally, inside full pages of other NZME regional and local papers in the North Island, that was misleading and couldn't have been repeated anyway, I think was their ruling in the end. But the Free Speech Union, they welcomed the appointments of Stephen Joyce and James Grennan. And they said in their statement, the media plays a crucial role in the ability to seek, receive and impart information. It's essential. Multiple viewpoints on issues of public interest aired. The change promises a return, they say, to more factual reporting if the board can restore traditional journalistic ethics of the Fourth Estate. So that's what Barbara Chapman was saying. This is separate to journalism and Fourth Estate concerns, and I think the journalistic ethics, the Fourth Estate role can be challenged. They're they have to abide by the Media Council, the regulator. People can complain, they can go to court if something's seriously wrong, and if you've got an advocacy ad and the Herald doesn't want to take it for its own business reasons, others might.
Hayden and I last week on Midweek Mediawatch talked about this odd encounter between John Campbell and David Seymour on TV NZ Plus. This was obviously being filmed by ACT for its YouTube channel. The parties, David versus the media thing as well. And that video has now appeared, Colin.
Yeah, that's right, because you spoke to Hayden about how David Seymour had said, look, I say all sorts of things to the media and they end up filleting it, and he's dissatisfied with that. New Zealand First does the same thing. They have a YouTube channel, but there is a section called David versus the media, isn't there, where I think you were predicting with Hayden that when it appeared it'd have a couple of capitalised
It would have a
words
capitalised adjective somewhere.
Indeed. So this one appeared, weird, in caps, interview with John Campbell.
There you go.
Can you trust the media? That's the title of this video. And the weird bit is this interview that goes on for almost half an hour, John Campbell and David Seymour facing each other on chairs, and I think the Beehive Theaterette. Has that weird stuff at the beginning where that preamble where John Campbell establishes that a guy called Andy is there filming it for, and he's aware that this is all going on ACT's YouTube channel. But I mean, this whole discussion they have is about various things about David Seymour taking up the deputy prime ministership, and it doesn't address, can you trust the media at all. I mean, there's a clear vibe about that because of the preamble. We're saying the reason we're doing this is we want people to see raw and uncut what I say, but they don't explore that at all. So that's a clear bit of, I'm going to call it clickbait. They want their base, their followers, their subscribers on that YouTube channel to see this, and get the sense that David Seymour is, giving it back to the media. So it's a pretty sort of aggressive stand to take. But in all that awkward preamble, there is an interesting bit which didn't make the TVNZ airing on TVNZ Plus, where John Campbell asks David Seymour, he's saying, look, we're the most available party. People seem to think we're not, John, but look, we're tremendously available and I'm happy to do this. And John Campbell said, you don't go on RNZ's Morning Report though, do you? And he gave, I think, the fullest reasoning for that quite long-lasting ban now that I've heard. This is what he had to say.
When we did what we regard as really important, serious stuff, like unleashing an alternative budget, they just weren't interested. Second of all, a lot of the young staff were very rude. And thirdly, they'd get me on for one thing, because they'd actually basically lie about what they wanted us on for, and then start asking me about something else. And I said, look, if you just said, So then I thought, well, gee, I actually don't need this in my life. And over that time that I've refused to go on, we've gone gangbusters. They've gone like that, and I've maintained a really good relationship with everyone else at Radio New Zealand, who I generally like. So it's up to them to change. Yeah.
Interesting, eh? You know, those to me sound like things that could really be very easily sought out if he was of a mind to do that. He gives so many interviews on so many outlets, and Morning Report still has a big audience. So I'd love to know what this rudeness is that he experienced from, I think he specified, the younger staff. But also that thing about, they lie, they get me on to talk about one thing and then ask about other things. I mean, if you're in a senior role in government, that happens. You'll be asked about other issues, and I'm surely he understands. And
I know what you mean, but also, and this is just to play devil's advocate to that. If you are a government minister and you're being asked about something, you don't want to speak out of turn. You want to prepare and make sure that your statements are going to be factually correct. And while you don't need detailed questions, generally, am I right in saying generally news programs will give a heads up about the general areas that you're going to be talking about?
Well, that is a bit contentious. For example, I think Mike Hosking of News Talk ZB once accused Morning Report. He said Christopher Luxon had been given heads up on things, and we don't do this here on this program. Right. He gets along very well with David Seymour, who's happy to go on his program and talk about things. It does happen. I can recall interviews between Jacinda Ardern and Mike Hosking where he was bringing up like quite a eclectic range of questioning for her, and she's saying, look, Mike, I just don't know why you're asking me this, and it would all get a bit weird. So the expectation there was that as Prime Minister you should be ready for anything. But I remember John Key got a bit miffed at times. He asked very detailed questions about things, and it could be just about any portfolio. If you're a minister, you can expect questions on transport or prisons or whatever it is, and the area will be a bit more defined. If you're a Prime Minister or a deputy or filling in or even a party leader with like David Seymour is, with a whole deep breadth of responsibilities, you could be asked about a whole range of things. You can't always answer it, but it seems strange to me that he's taking that attitude. And when he's Deputy Prime Minister, it will be a bit odd that he's not, and his ministers of the ACT Party who are in the government as ministers will not be appearing on Morning Report because that's their stance.
Colin, I'm sorry I've left you only a minute at the end to discuss media and sport. Jamie Wall and I last week were talking about Run It Straight, this competition Run It Straight, and Jamie talked about the media coverage around this being a bit hysterical. You've been pondering this.
Yeah, well, in fact I was, because we did a thing about the backlash against Run It Straight. People saying, look, don't try and get the government to ban it. And the week before that on Mediawatch, we'd looked at the Prime Minister saying you can't legislate against this, but they do legislate against other things where there's safety risk and clear risk of harm, medical field and so on. So I thought it was a bit strange, but Jamie saying look, also the criticism of this stuff in the mainstream media and the controversy because it's harm can be done to people is what they feed off. And I had a look at some of the social media stuff and the channels and so on and the content, and it's just so different. It's such a massively different vibe. Dan Hooker, for example, with his backyard fights, I looked at some of that, talking up the social aspects, the community aspects of it. It's not to everyone's taste, but there is a different side to this, and maybe we could explore it again another time, and even with Jamie, because it's a fascinating area. Different media, different audiences, and in a way that's a sign of the times.
Colin Peacock, always nice to chat, Colin. Thank you.
All good. See you in a couple of weeks.
And that is Colin Peacock.